Remember, the Tang tried to do this. Tang, China, pushed to the west to incorporate the Silk Roads, and they were stopped by the Abbasid armies at the Battle of Talas. Well, the Mongols did succeed in doing this, and the great Yasa, which is very conducive to law, helped encourage Silk Road trade, and the Mongols collected tribute at major cities and exchange points along the Silk Roads, increasing their wealth. Also, and this might seem counterintuitive, the cities that were laid to waste completely along the Silk Roads really resemble pruning a tree down of unnecessary branches. That basically they streamlined the Silk Roads. They made it much more compact, much more dense, and much more efficient by eliminating some of the cities along the roads, which in turn brought new vigor to the cities that remained. Now let's turn our attention and look at the effect of the Mongols on several areas around the world, areas around Eurasia that they conquered or controlled. And I want to start with the Dar al-Islam, the Islamic world. Now, Genghis Khan died, and he passed rule to his oldest son, to one of his sons, and then later on his grandsons would rule separate, distinct areas. And one of his grandsons took on the Abbasid dynasty, and in 1258 sacked and destroyed the city of Baghdad. Remember, this is the administrative center of the Abbasid dynasty. The Mongols got to the city, they looted the city of its wealth, they captured the caliph, and they beheaded him and his entire family. And by family, I mean his clan, several hundred. And according to accounts at the time, they massacred over 200,000 residents of Baghdad, killed them right out in the streets. Now, what this did, this shattered the unity of the Dar al-Islam. And in subsequent time periods, as we'll see, especially in the next time period we study, there's not one unified Dar al-Islam under a single caliph. You'll have separate regions emerging, and there is no unified Dar al-Islam down to today with the formation of nation states and so forth. So, because of the Mongols, the Dar al-Islam was shattered. Now, in the area which is modern Turkey and Anatolia, the Mongols drove into that area as well. Now remember, a Turkish tribe who had converted to Islam resided in Anatolia. These are known as the Seljuks. Remember, Islam gave them a sense of unity and allowed them to pull together into a large empire. The Seljuks had taken Jerusalem and provoked the Crusades earlier. Well, when the Muslims got to Anatolia, they fought the Seljuks. The Seljuks finally surrendered. And after a while, the Muslims abandoned Anatolia, and they created a power vacuum there, much like when Alexander the Great invaded the northern part of South Asia, when he invaded the Aryan kingdoms way back in the time of Chandragupta, and then withdrew. And what this did, it allowed for the rise of another tribe, which probably we would not have heard of in history, and this tribe became known as the Ottomans. So in a sense, the Muslims, or the Mongols in Anatolia, gave rise to the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire will last all the way into the First World War. Now, you know from class that the Russian civilization was forming. It formed out of the trade relations between the people of Scandinavia and Constantinople, and there around the city of Kiev you have the Kievan Rus forming, and Vladimir had converted to Christianity. Well, the Mongols came, and Kiev had already been destroyed. The Mongols took on the Russians. They tried to take Novgorod in the north, but it was protected geographically by thick forest, and as the winter began to thaw, they could not cross some important key rivers, so the Mongols gave up on Novgorod and turned to the south. And what happened in Russia is unique. The Mongols got to Russia, and they ended up brokering a deal with the Russians. Now, the Russians were also being assaulted from the west as well, and a man who's considered one of the heroes of Russian history, Alexander Nevsky, who outside of Russia really isn't known too well in world history. Nevsky turned his forces to defeat the Germanic invasions on the west and then brokered a deal with the Mongols where he set up Russia as a vassal state of the Mongols. What this means is that they paid tribute to the Mongols every year. So they purchased their independence, but it really wasn't independence. They paid the Mongols off every year, much the same way that Korea under the Shilla dynasty did with the Tang after the Tang invaded the Korean peninsula. Now this would have a profound effect on the flow of Russian history. With Kiev out of the way, the city among the Russians that really the only city that paid tribute on time to the Mongols was the city of Moscow, and the Mongols gave it special privileges. They used Moscow as a major collection site of tribute, favored it among the others, and this really brought the center of power and attention in the Russian civilization to the city of Moscow. So really, in a sense, in a direct sense, the Mongol relationship with their vassal state of Russia promoted the city of Moscow, which is today the capital city of Russia. There were other influences as well. The Russians borrowed some military tactics from the Mongols. The political institutions of Russia would be influenced by the Mongols, that strong centralized state, which you know was already there from the Byzantine influence, so it becomes reinforced through the Mongol rule. And another impact that the Mongol rule had on Russia was that it kind of held them as this in feudalism, as this feudal vassal state for well over a century. And some historians claim that this slowed down the growth of Russia. It prevented them from benefiting from advancements that were being made elsewhere in the world, kind of held them in a state of backwardness. And Peter the Great would try to catch Russia up with everybody else, with the other nations when he came to power, which we'll look at in the next time period. But that's a debatable result of the Mongol occupation of Russia. But they did not grow or advance much under the Mongol yoke. Now, China is a special exception to everything else. The Mongols defeated China, and they moved to, if you remember at this time, the Song dynasty was there. Matter of fact, Genghis Khan was born during the time of the Song dynasty in China. And the Song dynasty had some problems where the Jurgens at the north had invaded, and they basically created their own dynasty in the northern part of China. And the Song dynasty had shrunk. They had moved down the Grand Canal and situated at Hangzhou in the southern part, and at this point it's called the Southern Song. The Jin dynasty in the north, which used to be part of the Song, is now controlled by the Jurgens, and the Mongols utterly destroyed that northern Jin dynasty, the dynasty that used to be part of the Song. They obliterated the city of Beijing, took it, held it under siege for over 2 years, and finally, after capturing some Chinese engineers, they were able to breach the walls of Beijing, and tens of thousands of women in the city jumped to their death off the tops of buildings rather than fall into the hands of the Mongols. After defeating this, they turned to the south, and they headed toward the Song dynasty itself, the Southern Song. And it was Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, who finally took the Southern Song dynasty. The Song fell in the year 1279. Now, China was very valuable. It was the source of an enormous amount of very lucrative luxury trade items, silk and the porcelains and everything else, and the Mongols wanted to take advantage of that, so they decided to set up a direct rule. Unlike Russia, that was held as a vassal state and just paid tribute, the Mongols, Kublai Khan actually set up in China and established his own dynasty, and this is called the Yuan dynasty. That's Y-U-A-N, and they would rule China directly for a long time. They would bring in foreign bureaucrats to help them rule. They would invite Muslims and Turks and various ethnic groups to come into China. And this was something quite different for China, to have these people, non-ethnic Chinese, in positions of authority. And China would later feel they would need to purge themselves from these influences when they finally did break free of Mongol rule. And that is the subject of the second podcast on China, when the Ming Dynasty is established. But for over a century, the Mongols ruled China under the Yuan dynasty. So as you can see, from one end of the Silk Roads to the other, the Mongols not only destroyed many cities, but they affected the course of history in many different ways. Now, there's a lot more detailed information about the Mongols that you will glean from your textbook reading and from our class discussions. But for now, there's your summary of the Mongols, and this concludes this podcast.